Sara Bernow, partner at McKinsey, based in Stockholm. She's been at McKinsey for 10 years or more, and she co-leads the institutional investor teams in all of Europe, and she also leads McKinsey Sustainable Investing team globally. Sara, the digital floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and thanks for that introduction. It's a privilege to be here with all of you today, even if it's on the digital floor rather than the physical floor. And maybe adding a bit to the background I have is also that I do spend most of my time in my role serving investors or owners of various kinds. So I'll bring the investor angle into this conversation. And what I wanted to talk to you today about over the next 10 minutes or so is around the case for social impact, meaning how can social impact create value and purpose at the same time. And doing that, I wanted to address 3 parts. First of all, what are the changes in stakeholder expectations that we're seeing? And I think that will tie nicely into what some of the previous speakers just talked about. Secondly, I want to talk more from the value creation perspective. How can social impact contribute also to financial value creation? And thirdly, I wanted to pause and look at, given where we are, what are some of the lessons that we learned regarding both success factors and pitfalls that will help us as we move forward? So what are some of the next steps we're seeing? And doing that, I also wanted to show you a presentation, which I'm hoping now, if technology is with us, that you can see it on the screen. And otherwise, I'm hoping that I'll get a message. So there we go. I wanted to take the starting point of this discussion in the social contract and the changes that we are seeing in the social contract. And as said, previous speakers talked about this, so I won't be lengthy, but I think it's an important starting point. And the concept of social contract may sound a bit theoretical, and it's indeed a topic that has been debated and over history from thinkers like Plato and his likes. But today we're taking the business angle. My colleagues at the McKinsey Global Institute have recently conducted research around 22 OECD countries, with both Spain and also Sweden, for example, included in the mix. And they looked at what is, given the period of turbulence, if you will, that we've been through now with COVID, with, if you look a few years back, with strong globalization, strong technological development, and a lot of things in society is changing. What are the implications on the social contract and what individuals expect from companies? And we see 6 factors that are increasing in focus, and you'll find those natural, but I think it's interesting to highlight a few of them. I think, first of all, there is an increased focus around treating workers fairly. So not only for a company is not only expected to provide employment, but as we talked about just recently, it's also expected to provide meaningful work, to provide health and both mental and physical healthcare benefits, safe and good working conditions. When it comes to investing in your employees, as an employer, you're not only required to make the necessary investments in order for your employee to manage a transition into a new role, but the expectation is rather that you should take a long-term view towards training and development and set your employees up for future success within or outside of the company. Similarly, around diversity and inclusion, the expectations are raising. It's not enough to have some big goals and targets to talk about. You are expected to be very clear around those targets, have clear metrics, and follow up and act on them, not only in your own company, but also in your value chain, for example. On the product side, it's not sufficient to create products or services that the companies or that your customers need, but you're expected, increasingly so, to actually make sure that those products have a positive impact on your customers or on the wider society. And indeed, you're expected to a greater extent to contribute to improving your community. And I think we all saw that very clearly when COVID hit us, that there was a big expectation of the companies to play a role in helping us all to solve this. And finally, companies are moving from building strong brands to making strong stands. And of course, the Black Lives Matter movement is a very clear example and something that's really emphasized that. So I think that's a starting point for where we are. And in line with that, we are indeed seeing that companies are facing increased pressure from different stakeholders to act on the social factors and on the social side of things. We do see it from investors. I'll get back to that, but we do see a capital shift towards ESG strategies and in particular also towards social strategies. We see it in the public opinion. We see it among employees and consumers that in those roles we're all making clearer stands and more bold decisions that are impacted by the social factor of a company. For example, 60% of Americans are deciding whether to buy or boycott a brand depending on how the response from the company was to the Black Lives Matter protests. We're seeing that 4 out of 10 employees consider themselves as a social activist, and an even higher rate of young employees would not take a job with an employer whose values they don't subscribe to. And all of this is manifesting itself also into stronger regulation. We're seeing, for example, now in the EU that taxonomy is taking into account or working on taking into account social factors to a higher degree, and we see stricter rules regarding human rights coming into place. And this increased pressure is posing, on the one hand, a bigger risk to companies. On the other hand, it's also an opportunity for companies to that get this right. And we'll talk about this. Looking a bit closer on the investor side, there is definitely an interesting momentum going on. First of all, there is an increased focus from investors on ESG, and I think that's nobody has missed that. There was actually a question myself and many colleagues had, and others in the community had when COVID hit us around what will happen to ESG and sustainability. Will this sort of fall further down the agendas? And I think that the learning, and this was done in April, right? I think the learning was that not at all. It rather took the other way around, so that the situation of COVID that we've been in have even more increased the pressure or the focus around the ESG topics. And then I think interesting for our conversation today, when asking investors around, so how will this increased focus happen? What is it that is getting more important when we talk about ESG? A vast majority says that it's the social factors that are getting more important. It's how we treat employers, it's how we think about diversity and inclusion, it's what is the social impact we have on the outer society, etc. That's what is getting more prominence and focus from the investor side. And I think that's very interesting, and especially with the backdrop that so far there has been a strong focus around environmental factors. And as one of my fellow speakers said before, that's easier to measure. It's clear that there is a burning platform, and a lot of focus when it comes to sustainability and ESG is around the environmental side. Now we're seeing this balance shifting, and even more so ahead of us. And interestingly then, from an investor perspective, this is both a risk and an opportunity. And I think one of the reasons why social impact is important from an investor perspective is that we do see a link to value creation. And I think that link is very clear in some topics, and I'll give a few examples. So for example, looking at diversity, and this is citing our own research, looking at diversity, the business case is very strong. It's very clear that if you are a more diverse company, the likelihood of financial outperformance is significantly higher. And that is true both for gender diversity and is true and for ethnic diversity, which you see on the page. What you don't see on the page is that it's even more true if you combine the two. So I think that's very clear numbers and research coming out of that. Taking another example around reskilling and upskilling, we do see a lot of companies invest significantly into this, with the giants like Walmart and Amazon putting thousands of their employees through very rigorous training programs in order to prepare them for the future of work. There are indeed very clear benefits of doing that. Of course, there are direct or even cash benefits that if you can increase the retention of your workers and actually reskill them as needed, you simply avoid recruiting costs and retrenchment costs to a greater extent. And there are also very important indirect benefits. There is something around future-proofing your workforce, improving the brand of the company, and also embedding a learning organization. And I think very importantly on the value creation side, it improves your employee engagement, which in turn has a very clear effect around retention and productivity of employees, which can be up to 4x. So those are some very important arguments. If we would then pause a bit and look at this again with coming from the investor angle, what are some of the learnings that we're making when it comes to social impact? And I think it's fair to say that most organizations, at least most that I meet, would describe it as they are on the journey here and they are learning. But what have we learned so far if we take a step back? I think it's very clear that there is an increased importance of the social factors also for companies, not only for investors, not only for citizens, but therefore also for companies. And that's acknowledged. It's often the employees that are the driving force why executives decide to invest more in social issues, be it upskilling their workforce, be it diversity and inclusion in order to boost performance. And I think it's important also to keep in mind that you have both an internal and an external side of social factors. Sometimes you'll see that companies are running big external programs that may be very helpful and impressive, but there is also an important internal side to this. I think the next learning is also extremely important. While more philanthropic actions can again be very helpful and powerful, the only way to make social impact sustainable for a company is to embed it into the core business of the operations. So there needs to be a link, and it needs to be integrated in what you're prioritizing and doing every day also. And maybe another important learning to that end, when you think about setting your ambition and strategy around social impact, it's not necessarily about taking all the factors and trying to address those, but it's really about, of course, making sure, do you want to make sure that you manage the risks according to each of the factors, but then selecting one or two where you would really like to move the needle. That's really core priority for you as a corporate. That makes sense given your context and industry and setting. That is what we see that makes a difference. And if I would just touch upon some of the pitfalls related to this, I think a few common ones, I listed them on the page here, is when you delegate or as an organization outsource social impact, either to CSR or to HR. And I think those functions are indeed typically very important. But in order for a company to have true social impacts, it needs to be part of the core business and it needs to be on the CEO agenda. And also the other common pitfall we're seeing is that it's sometimes we're seeing companies setting very high ambitions and making bold statements, which is all great and a great starting point, but very little will happen unless that is followed up by clear action plans on how to reach those bold ambitions and bold visions. So I think those are some of the important lessons, and I'll just finish off with maybe summarizing them in terms of what's next. And I think I just wanted to make 3 points. First of all is that it's definitely a growing importance of ESG. Many of you find this very natural. I also often get the question around, this is now so much in focus. Is it a trend that will fade away? Will there be a backlash? And I do not truly believe that's not the case. Younger generations are significantly more focused than we are on these issues. And we see the capital shifting towards ESG strategies at a very high pace. And if I would look at the sort of social strategies here, such as social impact bonds, for example, the growth rates would be significantly higher than what I have on the page. So I think that's one important. And the other important factor is that the social impact within that is increasing as a focus. The balance between E and S, if you will, is changing, and social impact is coming as a topic on the CEO agenda. For many of you, it already is, but it's increasingly so. And the third one is around making sure in order to create value from social impact, it needs to be embedded into the core of the business. So finishing there and handing the digital stage
to
back
me.
to you.
Thank you very much, Sara. Thank you.